be an AIDS dissident means to challenge HIV as the cause of AIDS and to explain that the AIDS drug AZT is harmful and doesn't work. My film diary will take us to Berlin, New York and London. And with the help of the small camera we're using now and 3 full film crews, I'll show you how the dissident battle is being fought. I tried the small camera out for myself with this shot of the lamp and potted plant above my desk. I'm using it for travelling shots and extra bits before we meet with the Berlin crew. John Lauritsen arrived from New York today and the long, hot summer of dissent truly began. He brought a case full of his book, The AIDS War, hot off the press. It chronicles the story of the AIDS dissident movement. Tomorrow we're going to Berlin to present the dissident voice at the World AIDS Conference. Why did he call his book The AIDS War?
Using a metaphor of war, saying that the AIDS phenomenon is like a war with the terrible loss of life and suffering, and also profiteering and propaganda, treachery, espionage, sabotage, and all of the things that we associate with the war, and of course intense censorship in trying to get out the truth about AIDS.
So John and I, together with Hector Gildemeister, a German-born biochemist who works with us, set off for Hanover and Berlin. In trying to open up the debate about AIDS, the dissidents have experienced intense hostility from scientists receiving funds for HIV research, and fierce criticism from companies with vested interests in HIV technology. For our assault on Berlin are to represent the views of leading scientists who question HIV as the cause of AIDS. These scientists have of course not been invited to the conference. And to point out that AZT, also called zidovudine, the Wellcome Company drug prescribed to HIV-positive people whether they're ill or not, is a toxic anti-cancer drug which has been shown in a recent study to be of no benefit. As we approached Berlin, I realized we were going to face 14,000 delegates who believe HIV is the cause of AIDS, and hundreds of pharmaceutical company reps with enormous financial interests vested in the virus AIDS hypothesis. Feels a bit like David and Goliath. It was reassuring in the evening to meet up with the Berlin group of dissidents and friends who'd gathered there for the conference week.
Nice to see you. If only we could reach them, if they would believe what we say. That would be so fantastic. If they saw all those dissidents who have already recovered. That would be so marvelous.
We will kill them, of course, because they were simple. We say AIDS is over. And shock, they will die. By shock, of course.
Yeah.
We all trooped off to sit at a pavement cafe.
We are here to talk about the International AIDS Conference, which unfortunately is taking place here in this city, which is a great shame for the city and for the nation, because it's just a congress of lies.
We'd been joined by the leading dissident of them all, Peter Duisberg. He happened to be in Berlin visiting his mother. He hadn't been invited to the conference. For 6 years, Peter Duisberg, professor of molecular biology from Berkeley, California, has been saying the retrovirus HIV is not capable of causing the AIDS syndrome. He's been pilloried by the AIDS Orthodoxy, ridiculed by the press, and had his outstanding investigator's grant cut off by the US National Institutes of Health. Duisberg maintains that AIDS is a toxic response and is not infectious. Here are some of the views that have driven the AIDS orthodoxy mad.
HIV cannot be the cause of AIDS because it doesn't infect enough cells and isn't active enough. It is a behavioral disease, it's not a contagious disease. It is a disease that is linked to drug abusers, intravenous drug users or oral drug users, and clinical health risk groups, like recipients of transfusions and hemophiliacs.
He challenges the HIV theory with further key arguments. 1, that there are thousands of cases of AIDS without HIV. 2, that many people with HIV for 10 years and more have not developed AIDS. 3, that animals injected with HIV have never developed AIDS. And 4, that AIDS hasn't spread like a new infectious sexually transmitted epidemic would. Met up with the German crew at last, and a whole new world opened up. We worked quickly to get our literature into the conference and onto the press racks as soon as possible. Robert Laarhoven from the Amsterdam group had prepared, with the help of Peter Rath, a formidable selection of dossiers. These included the journal Rethinking AIDS, from the Group for the Scientific Re-Evaluation of the HIV/AIDS Hypothesis, a group comprising 150 scientists and researchers, including a Nobel Prize winner. Our efforts were futile. Within hours, all the dossiers in the press lounge were confiscated by the organisers. But Robert managed to get some onto a stand in one of the main conference halls. One of the first questions asked at the opening press briefing was why had Peter Duesberg not been invited? The conference chairman, Professor Otto Habermehl, said it was because he hadn't presented a paper to the selection panel, which is nonsense, because neither did any of the other key speakers before they were invited. Interesting to note that Habermehl also said that not everyone who has HIV will progress to AIDS, a major shift from the early days when a death sentence was pronounced on everybody with HIV. Now Anthony Fauci, one of the barons of the AIDS orthodoxy, is also shifting towards a multifactorial position, namely that HIV can't do the job on its own.
Clearly the virus is the major factor, and I think we should put that to rest, but there are other things that need to be addressed from a potential therapeutic standpoint, and only by understanding the fundamental mechanisms of pathogenesis can we approach this multifactorial and multiphasic disease in a comprehensive fashion.
I am reminded that as far back as 1990, Professor Luc Montagnier, who discovered HIV, was recognizing that HIV by itself wasn't sufficient to cause AIDS.
At first, yes, we thought we had the best candidate for this virus to be the cause of AIDS. But after a while, even from the beginning actually, we thought maybe for the activation of that virus in cells, we need some cofactors. So I would agree that HIV by itself, or some strains of HIV, are not sufficient to induce AIDS.
Of development policy, and this year, for the first year, the subject
Dean Jameson of the World Bank was there,
3 weeks.
as was Michael Merson, head of the WHO's Global Programme on AIDS, with a budget of $75 million a year of undesignated funding, confirming how much money is involved in the virus AIDS infectious hypothesis. Money that's raised through reinforcing the age-old fear of plague.
The impact of the epidemic is going to be something like $9 billion by the year 2000. Certainly we are seeing more and more investment by the private sector in prevention efforts. We have efforts underway in the United States and the United Kingdom, very simple, which was to invest now in prevention of AIDS or maybe pay a much greater price later. It is actually very much...
Listening intently to all of this, I spotted Eleanor Burkett, well known for her articles in the Miami Herald, reflecting the dissident debate. She's currently writing a book on the subject. We decided to take a breath of fresh air and stroll around the nearby lake. Why was there a need for her book?
I think that what happens in the American press is that a lot of the important controversies that people in the community or people in the field of AIDS research know about, in fact, are not being introduced or introduced properly to the American public. So you have an issue like the causation of AIDS and whether or not HIV alone is sufficient to cause the disease. We all know this is a controversy, but the American population does know that.
Boiling hot day. Met one of the Berlin group protesters outside the conference center with his banner, looking like a brave sentinel. Inside, Dr. Robert Gallo was giving his speech at the morning plenary. In the press lounge, journalists, eager to take away a little nugget of hope in the battle to target the allegedly mutating HIV virus, had an air of bemused stupefaction at what was clearly a potpourri of virological mystification speak, stirred in with a dollop of wishful thinking.
For the future, there's an exciting theoretical possibility of using triple helix oligodeoxynucleotide antisenses, which will recognize double helical DNA, that is, viral sequences not yet expressed. In theory, this could have dramatic effects because it would allow us to find the silent infected cells. And you can imagine theoretically, if that's the birth, what a major step forward that would be.
We decided this was the time to put some important points to Dr. Gallo. Question for Dr. Gallo. Professor Robert Root Bernstein, author of Rethinking AIDS, has said that by the end of the century we'll know everything there is to know about HIV and nothing about AIDS. Given that all of Professor Peter Duesberg's predictions have come true, namely that there's been no heterosexual spread of AIDS in the Western world and that AZT doesn't work, when will you, Dr. Gallo, agree that we need to fund a total reappraisal of the HIV-AIDS hypothesis, not dictated to by the search for endless, new, useless and damaging antivirals?
Okay, thank you for the statement. Short answer.
I think Dr. Ruth Bernstein doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay.
No discussion, please. Sorry. Next question. Up to there.
The answer is, I think he's wrong, and I think any rational person who's looked at this carefully, slowly, and is trained has come to the same conclusion that he's wrong. I don't influence funding. I am not a director of an institute. I do my work. I'm working on HIV as the cause of this disease. I have since 1984. If you and Ruth Bernstein don't believe it, so be it. Do your own work on what you think the cause is and don't bother me.
Thank you. Next question.
Many of us knew that Dr. Gallo had been under investigation for 3 years by the US Federal Office of Research Integrity, and that in December 1992 he'd been found guilty of scientific misconduct in relation to his HIV research. He's appealing against the finding. Robert Larhoven was next.
Thank you. Next question.
Hello, I have a question for Mr. Hoffman, for Chairman. Could you tell me whether Dr. Gallo was accepted as the key speaker of this conference before or after he was found guilty of scientific misconduct? And if after, do you think it's acceptable to have a scientist who has lost credibility addressing us at this moment?
Thank you for your opinion. Which is your opinion?
It's a question.
No. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
I demand this question to be answered.
I'm going to answer it. We won't discuss. Thank you. The chairman of the conference is not here. As soon as he comes, he will answer it. Okay? And I won't forget it. Thank you. Next question.
At the very end of the press conference, Robert finally got his answer.
To give you a short and clear answer. Why shouldn't the International Conference on AIDS invite two very fruitful AIDS researchers, and this is Professor Montagnier and Professor Gallo. Thank you for coming.
The session had a lively ending when a furious Martin Delaney, AIDS activist from San Francisco, upbraided me for questioning the heterosexual spread of AIDS. So excited did he become that he grabbed me in a vice-like grip.
AIDS. They have CMV, retinitis, madam. Well, listen.
Then Hector waded into the fray.
Drug addict, you silly twit.
Oh, you silly twit. That data has been rebutted. Conclusive. What about Duesberg and the drug addict nonsense?
There's 63 heterosexual cases in Great Britain, which is one...
Meanwhile, Dr. Gallo stormed off after calling Robert cruel and was besieged by a throng of journalists. Notice one of his 3 bodyguards using strong-arm tactics against what was nothing more than journalistic exuberance. Since when does a scientist have to go to a conference with 3 bodyguards, I ask myself.
The atmosphere is very strange in a way, because people are waiting for something to happen and nothing really happens except the same old stupid propaganda. Always the same thing. We are waiting for vaccinations and they don't come. They are promised every year they would come sometime later, but they never come. It's an atmosphere of waiting for something that doesn't come.
We'd gone round the corner from the conference centre to Carvey's flat. The group's posters and banners have rocked Berlin this week, and they've joined up this evening to watch transmission of their own cable programme.
Was dann auch wieder zu diesen Langzeitvergiftungen führt, die dann wiederum unter diesen Krankenhäusern auch in...
Our leaflets have headlines like HIV is good for you, condoms are dangerous, or condoms equal death. And we explain the scientific issues, why HIV is an absolutely harmless virus, and why the causes of the diseases they are calling AIDS at the moment are different ones, rather than viral or infectious ones.
What is the logic behind condoms equal death?
Because condoms are misleading people so much. People take condoms because they believe that AIDS is transmitted sexually, which it is not really. The causes are different ones, so they don't care about the real causes. They get sick because they think, as long as I take condoms, nothing can happen to me, and this is wrong and fatal. Here in the Western world, very often the causes of AIDS are drug abuse or long-term intoxication with too many or over-medication with antibiotics and other medications. And also what I personally like to emphasize very much is the psychic issue. Because imagine some doctor tells you you are HIV positive. It's such a shock that many people who suffer from this shock of this pseudo-diagnosis, as we call it, they try to commit suicide, they don't eat enough anymore and good enough anymore, they start to use drugs or more drugs, they start to drink or to drink more. So alone this diagnosis of being positive, which doesn't really mean anything, is very pathogenic.
My name is Gabriela. I'm infected since 8 or 9 years with HIV. And when I get this diagnosis that I die in 2 years, I become totally crazy. I made 2 suicides of that, and I start to sniff cocaine because I couldn't live with this knowledge. And I stopped using cocaine because they put me in prison in Amsterdam. And after I stopped cocaine, I go into therapy. And my health became bad because while I used cocaine, my health was very bad. I was often very thick. I became thin. I couldn't eat anything.
Other Berlin dissidents had gathered at Carvey's to tell us how they felt. One group has produced this journal, edited by biologist Ilse Lass, which criticizes aggressive militaristic images associated with HIV and AIDS prevention.
It's a sex poster. There's a soldier on it. And he thinks about a woman, and there is written combat ready, condom ready. And I don't think it is good for people to think in a militaristic way about sex.
We went to see how Robert was getting on at his stand with the leaflets and literature. He'd joined up with Nicky Adams from the English Collective of Prostitutes, and they appeared to be doing a roaring trade.
We came to the conference because we wanted to gather information to strengthen our work that we've been doing against AIDS being used as an excuse for repressive legislation against prostitute women and other so-called high-risk people. For example, in the States, AIDS has been used as an excuse to bring in mandatory testing of prostitute women, and in other areas, AIDS is being used as an excuse to bring in legalised state-run prostitution, which we are very opposed to.
Back into the fray this morning to tackle Professor Ian Weller on the toxicity data from the Concord study. He had taken a brave stand in revealing that the Concord study showed no benefit from AZT. In fact, more people died in the group who took the drug longest, and more of them suffered severe side effects. but the toxicity data from Concord hasn't been made available and is still in the hands of Wellcome and the Medical Research Council. We wanted to know how many people in the early group who were given AZT longest developed side effects like anemia, needing blood transfusions, and lymphomas, a form of cancer.
I can't give you accurate figures on lymphoma. I think it's a few cases that developed lymphoma. 3 or 4, I can't remember the exact number without the tables here.
Later on, he came back to the subject.
It's Mrs. Shenton, isn't it? Can I just qualify my answer to your question about lymphoma and just say that that was first events, the handful of cases. I can't give you data on the cases beyond that, but we will be analysing that. I just wanted to qualify that.
Thank you.
So we still don't know when this important information will be made public.
Mothers and babies will not be sacrificed to AZT.
So great is current concern about AZT that earlier in June a demonstration took place outside Great Ormond Street Hospital protesting about studies giving AZT to HIV-positive babies who are asymptomatic, after the Concord study had shown no benefit in adults. Great Ormond Street Hospital is the most famous children's hospital in the UK. It's also at the centre of a controversial study that's treating babies born to HIV-positive mothers with an AIDS drug called AZT or Retrovir.
We've come here today to protest against the trials of AZT on babies.
In this country at the moment, nobody seems to care that people are taking this drug which is toxic.
This is the syrup form in which AZT is given to the children. AZT can have very serious side effects in adults, including nausea and vomiting, destruction of bone marrow and severe anemias, sometimes requiring blood transfusions. This HIV-positive African woman is on AZT and her son is undergoing tests at Great Ormond Street.
I'm worried he should be given the AZT treatment and I need more information.
Many of the women who are in the Great Ormond Street study are from Africa. Marilyn Bazara is a community worker with HIV-positive families.
People are suffering. These side effects are so strong from this medicine AZT. They're losing their muscles, they have headaches, they have diarrhea and all this. So they need more information.
George Galloway MP has tabled questions about AZT in Parliament. He's worried about the trials in children.
If people knew that this highly toxic drug was being administered to potentially hundreds of small children, as I say, most of them black, most of them without a voice, their parents without a voice in British society, then I think that these tests would be stopped. And I think that the whole situation ought to be investigated by the government.
The Medical Research Council part funds the Penta study. They gave us this statement. Only children with proven HIV infection can be enrolled into the study. Full discussion and written consent is required before any child enters the trial. Following publication of the Concord trial, the Penta trial was reviewed. The decision to continue the trial was unanimously endorsed by the Medical Research Council. While we were in Berlin, reports about the AZT Concord study made headline news. No benefit. Nikki Adams brought her worries about continuing with the Penta AZT studies in babies to the conference.
Would you go as far as saying that the trials should be stopped immediately?
I would say that I think it would be wrong to extrapolate the results in an adult trial to the child model. But I think your question is best directed at a paediatrician, and therefore I would support the continuation of trials in children of that nature.
Even when they're asymptomatic?
Even when they're asymptomatic, yes.
It was at this moment that the news began to spread that there'd been an incident outside involving ACT UP. ACT UP, the AIDS activist group, was present in force at the conference. They were there as official dissidents. ACT UP has received money from Wellcome. The UK group had told us earlier that they'd received £60,000 from the manufacturers of AZT. We now learn that members of the Berlin dissident group with anti-Wellcome banners had been attacked by ACT UP and their banners burned.
A group from ACT UP people, they come out of the building from the Congress and they made a demonstration and they give statements against the British government, and suddenly some people out of this group come to us and they took our posters and burned them.
Peter Schmidt, who'd been filming the goings-on, had been ordered to erase his tapes by one of the German professors.
Professor Seichert not only wanted his picture delayed, he wanted to have the complete cassette. Well, I refused him. I said, no, there's no way. And so we only took out his pictures out of from the cassette.
Where?
Here, right, where we are staying.
On this
Under
pavement?
the sun we made it with my camera.
We then heard that Robert Laarhoven had been turfed out of his stand inside the hall, barred from the conference and told to leave the country.
And they said that I had to leave on charges of trespassing. They took my press card and two policemen brought me outside the conference hall.
And what did they say?
That if I ever cross this line, this line, I would be arrested. It became more clear to me that there is a very heavy censorship on dissident information. And I'm not afraid anymore to use words as AIDS fascism.
Well, this is the first AIDS conference ever where there's a real presence of honest AIDS dissidents. Those of us who are opposed to the basic AIDS paradigm, the HIV/AIDS hypothesis, and AZT therapy. At the same time, there have been shocking events at this conference, which means that the people in the AIDS establishment are afraid of free speech.
The tension of the last few days has begun to take its toll. No longer do any of us smile. The hostility is so powerful, even amongst our own journalist fraternity, that all we can do is set our faces into a concrete mould and wade through the sea of somber faces. We were staying at Hector's cousin's home in a quiet residential Berlin street, and it was this curtain of green from the terrace that soothed the spirit at the end of the day. The last day. We'd been joined by Celia Farber, veteran dissident columnist from Spin magazine. She's reported on Peter Duesberg's scientific arguments over the last 7 years. How did she feel about his absence at the conference?
I wish he were here. I wish he would come to one of these things and that it would actually really come to a head properly one of these days. He would be such a treasure in this place because he's got because he has been taking the opposite point of view. He is the one who is the most well-read and fortified in the criticism, and obviously criticism is the most constructive thing to any hypothesis. I do get extremely despondent, and I've been feeling that. When I walk around here, I feel like this is so hopeless. What we are up against is a gargantuan, multi-billion-dollar infrastructure. And who do we think we are? Who do we think we are kidding? You know, I mean, but you have to just be Sisyphus, right? And keep pushing the rock up the hill and let it roll down again. There's no other choice. The only other option is to just turn around and walk away, which we're obviously, we know what we know, so it's too late to do that.
So we rolled the rock up the hill to the last press conference. I had lost my crew, so took the small camera along with a shaking hand. We'd issued our own press release.
To know this, I would like to ask Habermehl, are you willing to apologize for the horrible acts of violence that you have condoned and for the acts of censorship for which you personally are responsible? You owe me and many people an apology. Can you do that, or will you refuse to do so?
May I answer shortly, simply no, since what you are saying is not the truth.
At the opening press briefing, Professor Habermehl had described people who question the role of HIV as mentally disturbed groups. Celia Farber took up the cudgels, reminding the panel that many distinguished scientists are questioning HIV.
Would you refer to Dr. Mullis, who's one of your colleagues, as mentally unstable, which is what you actually did? If you were not aware of this, now that you have been made aware of it, would you consider an apology?
I would like to give a statement. We are here under very severe pressure, and to perform such an unusual big conference is a very difficult work. I think it was really not a good way to say mentally disturbed, but I would change it. I would say bizarre.
I was denied the opportunity to ask a question, so tried to interview Professor Habermehl at the end. You said that you had sent this person out of the conference because he hadn't paid for the booth. Why did you allow 5 other organizations? He just walked away. The way we were treated by the AIDS establishment in Berlin left a bad taste in our mouths, but the situation was redressed by the warmth of the dissident groups and the beauty of Berlin. There's only 2 days to go before our AZT on Trial conference. We'd been planning it carefully for 2 months and had invited our European and American friends. The key speaker is Peter Duisberg.
If 3 other people don't show up, you don't look like a fool then. Expect it to be practical and guess.
Shall we go into that kind of detail later on? Sure. The exchange of information. Yeah.
Okay.
The conference is being organised by an ad hoc committee called SCAM, the Standing Committee on AZT Malpractice, chaired by Martin Walker, author of the book Dirty Medicine. We had placed ads in the gay press, but Richard Henriquez had some bad news. The pink paper had withdrawn our ad.
They pulled all the correspondence, including all that had been pulled. They pulled absolutely everything. They pulled the advertisement to SCAM as well, because they had pressure put on them.
Went to meet Peter Duisberg, who was flying in from San Francisco.
Accusing me now of charging him for misconduct or misconduct allegation. That's the thing.
The curve is there, and there's no data for the curve.
Nobody could find the data yet.
The big day at last. Martin Walker opened the conference with a speech about the way a large multinational like Wellcome, that holds the patent for AZT, can use its influence.
What we're talking about is the product marketing of a very expensive, overcapitalised product, which has got to be sold on and has got to make something in the region of 400 or 600 million pounds in the first 3 or 4 years of its existence. It normally takes a period of anything between 5 and 12 years for a new drug to obtain a licence. AZT was fast-tracked through the British licensing system, even though there had been no trials in Britain. I want you to remember that, because it's very important.
Martin went on to talk of the Concord study and the fact that this study, partly funded with public money, hasn't been published in full.
We still do not know when Wellcome first had the results of the trial, and even now we actually know next to nothing about the results. Why is the Department of Health, which was an eager participant in the trials, not defending our interests and holding a frank public debate about the results, instead of continuing to condone the prescription of the drug?
John Lauritsen was the next speaker. He reminded us of the officially documented evidence of the irregularities in the trials that led to the licensing of AZT, both in the UK and also in the USA by the Food and Drug Administration, which is known as the FDA.
FDA documents released under the Freedom of Information Act show that this study was incredibly uncontrolled and sloppy. Violations of protocol were widespread,
And I might add that protocols are the rules of the game for a study. So if you violate the rules of a game, you are cheating. If investigators violate the protocols, they are cheating. There was cheating in the study, and I will certainly get to it. Above all, the one thing which justifies my use of the word fraud, and I'm the son of a lawyer, and I'm not foolhardy, so when I say fraud, you may be sure that I have something to back it up, is this. It is very clear from some of the memoranda that the investigators deliberately used data that they knew were false. No ethical scientist ever uses data that he knows are no good.
The documents show that one of the study centers, the Boston one, was investigated by the FDA.
The FDA investigators, and they appear to have been unusual in that they were conscientious. They recommended that every bit of data from Boston be totally excluded from the study. Almost every single patient in the Boston group had violations of protocol. There was a high-level meeting attended by the FDA Commissioner Frank Young and Vice President of Research David Barry of Burroughs Wellcome. They decided what did they do about all of the fraudulent Boston data as well as innumerable violations of protocol at the other 11 centers. They decided to exclude nothing at all. Nothing. Garbage was thrown in with the good stuff. On this basis alone, the phase 2 trials were fraudulent.
During the breaks, we asked some of the participants why they thought it was important to be there. Steve Lumley is HIV positive and works as an HIV trainer for a local authority.
I think it's outrageous that people whose job it is to tell people about HIV and AIDS actually don't have the information, and the information is not being made available to them quite deliberately to be able to do their jobs.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Then Peter Duesberg came to the microphone. He began by explaining why AZT, a cancer chemotherapy drug that mimics thymidine in our DNA chain and then blocks the chain from making new cells, is not appropriate as an antiviral drug.
So AZT was developed in the 60s. John Lloydson already gave you part of the story. To kill human cells. That was what it was developed for. It was a designer drug to be used in cancer chemotherapy. It is an analog of the 4 building blocks of DNA. Thymidine exactly is the building block that it is related to, and it acts as a chain terminator of DNA synthesis. So whenever AZT is incorporated into DNA instead of thymidine, the DNA stops right there. That's the end of the DNA. And when DNA stops, the primary consequence is the cell is gone. DNA is the central molecule of life, and if you terminate it, then it's time to say goodbye to this planet.
Duesberg went on to criticize earlier studies by Gallo, Broder, Furman and others that led to claims that AZT can target HIV and is 1,000 times more toxic to HIV than to healthy human cells.
If the drug is more toxic to the agent that is presumably causing disease than it is to the host, that is what they call the pharmaceutic window, or the therapeutic window in which you can operate.
Toxicity levels and dosage recommendations in the doctor's reference books are still set according to the earlier low toxicity findings.
But in the meantime, a number of other investigators have also checked the toxicity of AZT on cells and viruses. And they found that Dr. Gallo erred and the Burroughs Wellcome erred by a factor of 1,000. That is not a minor little error. They found that the toxicity for the cell was a micromolar. It's still based on
this makes it 1,000 times more toxic than was originally claimed.
So Gallo, as I said, faithfully believed, and so did Burroughs Wellcome and Broder, that AZT therapy was justified because AZT is 1,000 times less toxic to the cell than it was to the virus. So that belief clearly must be questioned now, because experimentally that result could not be reproduced by 4 independent studies.
Duesberg then moved on to attack the studies that led to the licensing of AZT. He pointed out that figures for deaths showed 19 in the non-drug or placebo group and only 1 in the AZT group. But 30 of the AZT group suffered such severe anemias they had to be kept alive with multiple blood transfusions. This was the case in only 5 in the placebo group.
They said in the same paper, if you look at the table, that 30 guys needed multiple transfusions. That is a euphemism. They would have died from anemia, that is, they didn't have enough red cells to breathe any longer, had they not been transfused with red cells from somebody else to keep them alive. So if you figure that in, and in the placebo group there were only 5, and it is quite possible that those in the placebo group get the anemia from sharing AZT, because they figured out very fast who got AZT and who got a placebo. They taste different and they smell different, and they actually did patient-initiated tox sharing. That could be the explanation for the anemia in the control group as well. So if you add that up, if you include the would-be deaths, had it not been for the transfusions, we would have 31 would-be deaths in the RCT group and 24 in the placebo group. And now there's no longer any reason for celebration.
Pascal de Bock is HIV positive. He took AZT for 3 years until he suffered a stroke and wasn't able to continue with his work as an operating theatre charge nurse. What did you decide to do about AZT?
I said, well, if the AZT had been sort of given for 3 years and hasn't done anything for my T4 count or for my health, there's something wrong there. And I decided, therefore, to bin any single medication I was on. So I just binned the migraine medications, the HIV medications and everything. And I just learned how to take responsibility for my own health through another helping group. And I've been much more alive since then.
The next speaker was Jad Adams, author of AIDS, the HIV Myth. He produced and directed the first film we made about AIDS and has strong views about the way the dissident voice has been reported.
I've never done a story in which there was so much resistance to the story being told by my colleagues or by the establishment, or where lower standards prevailed in the supposed interest of the public good. There's resistance even to the reporting of views by dissidents, even to the reporting of the fact that there are dissidents. And when there was a breakthrough at the spring of last year, when the AIDS A Different View conference took place in Amsterdam, any reporting of the conference, almost any reporting, came with its own health warning, and here in the Independent we see those very words. It should carry a health warning. They referred to the conference as the spreading of a terrible myth.
Gareth James is a homeopath working with gay men.
Psychology plays a huge part. Most of my clients are extremely depressed. They live in fear, and a lot of the consultation time that I spend with them is actually geared towards deprogramming them and debriefing them from the HIV and AIDS hypothesis. I've become so motivated, I feel, because the gay scene is very much in denial about what is going on. Gay men, as a gay man who lives on the scene, I see that the gay scene in London runs on poppers and on ecstasy. The sex scene runs on poppers, and the club scene runs on ecstasy, coke, speed, acid. So my experience with people with AIDS is I don't have any clients who do not have what I would term a toxic history.
In utter desperation, I took AZT. It made me ill. I went through that process 5 times. I was never on it for more than a month, but my partner, Kevin, persisted, and he died. On April the 2nd, we awoke to the news that the Concord trials had failed.
Michael and Carl Burge decided to demonstrate outside the Terence Higgins Trust to protest about the Trust's acceptance of funds from Wellcome to promote the use of AZT.
Last week, they took out a High Court injunction against us. And we may now have to go to prison if we break that injunction and demonstrate again. But tomorrow we're going to be back outside the Terence Higgins Trust.
At the very end, I spoke to Michael Verney-Elliott, who's reported on 3 of our dissident documentaries. After 7 years of reporting on this issue, are you surprised at how little headway has been made?
I'm not surprised, I'm disappointed. But, you know, little by little, we'll get there. We'll get there.
How?
Galileo didn't do it overnight.
How will we get there?
Because as AZT is seen to be a total disaster, at best useless, at worst lethal, people are going to get the message. It's like, you can't fool the people all the time. People are going to get hep to this. It's like, you know, somebody is eventually going to say the emperor has no clothes.
New York has long been the home of many leading AIDS dissidents and dissident journals. Spin magazine has been running a dissident column since 1987. Its main contributor has been Celia Farber. In its latest edition, editor Bob Guccione Jr. has just published an extended interview he conducted with Peter Duesberg.
We never meant to be intentionally dissident, but we realized that the truth was being obfuscated by the mainstream, and that our job as journalists is to search for the truth, popular or not. So we stayed on that beat. Natural criticism of us was that we were in some way encouraging unsafe sex. This is completely ridiculous. We have over and over and over editorialized that whatever you do, be careful, because there are so many other STDs out there. They're all on the rise. And we know they're damaging. We don't know HIV does any damage. So we say constantly, protect yourself, be careful, be smart. And we even put a condom in our magazine, one issue, which got us banned across America, for which I'm immensely proud, but we got banned for that. So no, we've always been on the side of safe sex, absolutely. But not this politically correct, banal obsequience to the party line. I get angry because lives are lost in the meantime. Lives are sacrificed. Lives are considered useless and meaningless and dropped by the wayside. How many people? That is a terrible, terrible tragedy being perpetuated because our government health agencies and our pharmaceutical industry and the research industry are unwilling to allow any debate to get in the way of their fantastic profit-making.
On to the offices of the gay weekly New York Native. Its editor, Chuck Ortleb, has consistently fought the AIDS orthodoxy and challenged HIV as the cause of AIDS. Chuck believes that AIDS is caused by a virus called HHV6, similar to the African swine fever virus, which he maintains leads to the chronic fatigue syndrome. Nina Ostrom, his managing editor, has written several books on the subject. Why had he taken a different line on AIDS?
Well, the thing that's always amazed me is that most gay publications have basically published the government line on the epidemic. And I've tried to understand why that is, because newspapers are not supposed to... newspapers are supposed to question authority, and most gay papers... almost without exception, have not been questioning authority. There's a line on the Native that they're just, the paper's just crazy and, in a state of denial. I mean, that's the word that was thrown at us initially, that we couldn't accept reality. And I think, the opposite is true, that we've faced reality since '83. I think that the economic disaster that awaits this country when the truth is told may be another reason why the truth cannot be told in newspapers. I want to prove that AIDS and chronic fatigue are the same disease and that they're caused by HHV6. And then we'll be done. The Native will have completed its mission, as far as I'm concerned, as an investigative newspaper.
Frank Bonakis, professor of mathematics at the City University of New York, has a very different view on the cause of AIDS. Another pioneering dissident, his personal experience of people with AIDS has given him a special insight.
In the course of the years, I have known thousands of people who have been diagnosed. And in my present daily life, at least 100 a day come in and out of my life. I know personally now over 260 who have been diagnosed and died. And all of these people were addicts, alcoholics. I'm not talking necessarily about simple things like just beer or whiskey or marijuana or even heroin. I'm talking about drugs that like ecstasy, Special K, MDA, and things of every poppers, these types of chemicals that stay in the body and that are not easily detoxified.
What does that lead you to conclude?
Well, for me, it makes me lean towards a immune dysfunction from chemical abuse, toxicity.
I used and abused drugs for 30 years. I knew that I was a high-risk category. At one point, I had gotten stabbed. I was in the hospital, and they came and they asked me to take the test because I was high risk, and I did, but I didn't go back for the results till a year later.
What sort of drugs were you taking?
Intravenous heroin, intravenous cocaine, marijuana, alcohol, barbiturates. I mean, it's easier for me to say the drugs that I wasn't taking.
So when you were diagnosed HIV positive, how did you feel psychologically?
I actually thought that I was going to die the next day. I didn't feel that there was any hope. And as a result, I found Heal. And Heal gave me the hope to continue living. And thank God, I have another 50 years left, at least.
Rafael has come off all drugs and works as an acupuncturist with HIV-positive people.
Right now, I feel like brand new money.
Can you tell me how you've helped Rafael?
Well, the first thing is if you have no hope, why even bother? So I utilized the fact that he had a history of drug use and was already a survivor. He never thought of himself in that way. I think that was instrumental. See, you've survived the drug scene. You survived your addiction. You already have the makings of a long-term survivor. I used the positive. I used what was there. He didn't need a doctor. He didn't need a healer. I'm against experts in that sense. Whenever I work with someone, I tell them, ultimately, you're the person who's going to live or die by the consequences of your decisions. Make them carefully and make them yourself. People were being programmed to get sick and die. Their experiences led me to believe that for some reason they were remarkable and were rejecting the programming. And that was the biggest thing in their story, is why they were living. So I felt that perhaps I could help other people reject the programming. The most important thing we do is we promote an attitude that is good for surviving, essential to surviving. We help people create a mindset that's conducive to recovering, and we do things that help people deprogram themselves.
We set off early this morning to join the demonstration outside the Medical Research Council, protesting against their funding of the AZT Penta study in babies. Professor Alfred Hessig has flown in from Switzerland. He's a specialist in immunology and deeply opposed to the prescribing of AZT. He believes the medical profession has made a big mistake about the cause of AIDS. I snatched a few words with him earlier this morning in Regent's Park.
AIDS is certainly not a response to an infectious agent, the HIV virus. Primarily, it's a stress response with persistent formation within the body of inflammatory substances which, if they don't stop and go on in formation, lead to death.
He believes that the inflammatory response causes too much iron to accumulate in the body, causing iron overload.
So the key mechanism to prevent AIDS is to lower the iron level. And this is probably very important to avoid the disorder.
very concerned that AZT is being given to anybody at all, especially to babies, when it was known to be too toxic many years ago to be given to cancer patients. So why are they now giving it to little babies?
The Medical Research Council should be accountable to the British public and to people generally for the kinds of experiments which it authorizes and the trials which it authorizes. So we as the public are demanding that the Medical Research Council not fund the trials of AZT at Great Ormond Street.
A delegation asked to speak to an MRC representative involved in the studies, but we were denied.
Read those, they are lies, they are lies, lies and lies.
I'm here because these trials are based on fraudulent science. They're based on a fraudulent hypothesis. There's no accountability of the scientists. They only dialogue and negotiate with their puppets and pets in AIDS organizations, which includes all the gay AIDS writers who write for the AIDS press. They are linked in an unholy marriage and diabolical alliance into which people with HIV and AIDS have no way of inputting. You have the AZT warlords in there. That's what this is about. And gay men are in collusion with the system that's destroying and killing them.
Sacrifice to AZT!
The 4 months of activity are over now and winter has set in, but the battle will continue. And I'm left with some of the strongest phrases of our long, hot summer of dissent ringing in my ears.
And their children will not be sacrificed to AZT!
HIV is not the cause of AIDS. There is no reason why somebody with HIV antibodies should not remain healthy. And there is no reason why most people with a diagnosis of so-called AIDS cannot recover.
It is HIV/AIDS hypothesis which is deadly and has killed these people. The medical profession has managed to be absolutely thick about trying to understand what is going on.
The easy solution is for people to take responsibility for their health and educate themselves. This is the ultimate answer, and this is the only way we will solve AIDS and other problems.
I think truth can be suspended, rerouted, rejected for astonishingly long periods of time, but I think it's kind of like energy. I don't think it can be destroyed. It is rather like an airplane in a holding pattern, and it does have to land somewhere eventually.